Hello, it's that time of year again. Everybody's doing vinyl tags, but I never quite have enough of the right records to do a vinyl tag. But fortunately, DJ Vinyl Vertigo, Scott, has designed a soul vinyl tag. So I've got to take part in that because I've got plenty of records that I can talk about here. There's some straightforward questions, some slightly more challenging questions. I'm going to try and keep it as quick as possible and see how we go. So the first question is the album, the soul album you've listened to most, and for me I think it has to be Trouble Man by Marvin Gaye. I first got this on cassette when I was about 15, listened to it religiously all the time. I've since had it on CD, I've had a couple of vinyl versions. I even remember downloading it on iTunes Music when you paid for downloads. Seems crazy now, but yeah, I love that album and I've listened to it a lot. The next album is the most recent album that you have purchased, and that was Curtis Mayfield with Linda Clifford. Perhaps not his most well-known album, but Curtis is Curtis and always great. You used to see this album everywhere for £5 or less. It's getting a slightly bit more expensive now, so I thought, I need this album, so I better get it soon before it gets a bit silly with price. So yeah, it's a really solid album actually. There's some good stuff on it. Next is a male soul artist, so I've gone for something slightly different. This is Swamp Dogg, the original D-O-G-G before Snoop. The man, the legend, slightly eccentric soul artist. This is a very sober piece of cover art by his standards. Most of his albums look pretty crazy, although he's doing some mad stuff on the back. This is actually a really soulful album. He's not really a brilliant singer, but he does things in his own inimitable style, and there's a really nice version of the country tune Sam Stone here, which is very soulful I think, and some other great stuff in my resume. This I think is my favourite Swamp Dogg album. Really good stuff, so interesting artist, and I think he's still around, Swamp Dogg, so good for him. Next up is an album on Stax, and this is actually not an album on Stax, it's a compilation on Light in the Attic Records, but it features the Stax artist Wendy Renee, who is not perhaps very well known, but she came to have many people's attention in the 1990s when she was sampled, particularly by Wu-Tang, After the Laughter. You'll know that song probably. And she's actually got some really good stuff, and this is a nice little collection of all of her singles. I don't think she did any albums, and there's some really good stuff on here. So interesting one on Stax. Next is an international artist, not from the United States. Obviously I'm from the UK, so I could mention many British soul artists, Loose Ends, Omar, to name a few, Sade. But actually I'm not going to go UK, I'm going to go to Australia. And this is Wilma Redding, perhaps more of a lounge singer, but some nice soulful moments on here. Nice version of Looking for Another Pure Love by Stevie Wonder. And when it's good, it's good. There's actually lots of good soul artists from Australia, surprisingly, and some really good sort of shouty soul artists as well. But anyway, that's Wilma Redding. Next is a female soul artist. I'm just going to keep it simple. Minnie. And there she is behind me as well. This is Come Into My Garden, perhaps her most celebrated album that she did with Charles Stepney on arrangements. It's an absolute classic, and I love Minnie, so she's my soul artist, my female soul artist. Next was a difficult question for me, which is a gospel album by a soul artist. Now, I don't really have any gospel albums. I think a lot of soul artists do a kind of gospel-y tune maybe on one of their on a song on their albums or something like that, but I've decided to cheat a bit, go for something completely different. This is a religious album released in Brazil by a soul singer from Brazil, Tim Maia. He got caught up in a religious cult in the 1970s called Rational Culture and released this amazing album. There's actually two albums, there's volume 1 and 2, and I think there's a 3 of sort of outtakes and B-sides and things, but it's a great album. It's not gospel, I suppose, but it does have this religious touch to it. It's in English and Portuguese, so there's something for everyone. And I think this is really interesting stuff. If you don't know it, check it out. Tim Maia, great soul singer, whether he's doing religious stuff or not. Next up is Blue Eyed Soul, and it's got to be Bobby Caldwell, one of the greatest blue-eyed soul singers. A really great singer, actually, blue-eyes or not. And really great songs, so do love a bit of Bobby. There's some great blue-eyed soul artists out there, and I'm just recently, in the last few years, been getting more and more into that, particularly the sort of late 70s, early 80s. There's some great stuff to find, so liking it. Next, an artist who you think doesn't get enough exposure, people don't know much about, and I'm not going to talk about one artist, I'm going to talk about a type of artist. Because when it comes to soul music, lots of people like to get very sanctimonious about what is truly soulful and what isn't. And they tend to denigrate disco music. And they don't seem to understand that disco music is basically music made by absolutely brilliant soul singers. It's just a bit more danceable, a lot of it. So if you think an artist like Loleatta Holloway is not an absolutely amazing soul singer, you're wrong. This is a brilliant album, and that is a soul album. It's only perhaps later on that she did a lot more disco-y stuff, which she's perhaps more famous for, but her earlier albums, absolute soul dynamite. Bobby Thurston, the song Check Out This Groove is a great funky disco track, but this album is a sterling soul album. It's absolutely great. Do not dismiss disco. Disco is just very danceable soul music, and it's great. I love disco. So, next, an album, a rock album with participation from a soul artist. I didn't really have many rock albums I could find with this, so I borrowed my wife's copy of Plastic Beach by Gorillaz. It's more of a pop album, and it's a great album. I really love this, and there's lots of interesting guests on it, and among those guests is Bobby Womack. If you need a soul legend on your album, how about that, Bobby Womack? This is a good album as well, I really love it. So that's nice, and Bobby Womack certainly brings the class to it. Next, a Motown album, Eddie Kendricks, Hold On, People Hold On, absolute classic. Some great songs on that one. Next, an artist who deserves a box set. I don't quite understand box sets, to be honest, because it's cheating, isn't it? It's more fun looking for the albums. But an artist who I think perhaps could benefit, I mean, maybe the box set exists already, I don't know, but investigating somebody's back catalogue through a box set would be good for Bill Withers, because everybody knows Ain't No Sunshine and Lovely Day, but when you go into the albums, there's amazing stuff. Don't forget, he's a brilliant songwriter, so he's always going to have interesting things to say. I think there's something for everyone. That's just two of his albums. Adjustments and Making Music, but he's got quite a few albums, and they're getting harder and harder to find and a bit more expensive, so maybe a box set would be the way to go. Who knows? Next, an artist you've seen in concert. Well, here's two that I saw at the end of last year, Leroy Hudson and Cherie Brown, both in concert, in the same concert. It was absolutely fantastic. I've talked about that before. That was great. Next, a group and a solo artist, oh no, hang on, a jazz album made by a soul singer. This was difficult, but many people perhaps don't know that Marvin Gaye had a frustrated dream to be a jazz crooner, and was constantly pestering Berry Gordy to record a jazz album. He did eventually do an album of Nat King Cole covers, I think, and it wasn't until 1997 that this was released, Vulnerable. I think it's only on CD, and it's him doing sort of jazzy crooner style music, and it's really, really good. I mean, it's Marvin Gaye. He could sing you Happy Birthday and it would sound amazing. But yeah, an interesting album. I haven't listened to this in ages, so I need to give it another spin, see what I think. But yeah, there's some interesting stuff. Is it a jazz album? Maybe. But anyway, that'll do. Next, a group and a solo singer from the group. So here's a classic group, the Chai Lights. And there's Eugene Record, the man behind the Chai Lights. Great album, this. Some really good songs on it, really fun songs on that. So yeah, I mean, that could have been any artist, any group really, but I've gone with the Chai Lights and Eugene. Next was an absolutely impossible question. Your favourite song. So I'm cheating. I'm going to talk about my favourite type of song. And for me, when it comes to soul music, I love songs with an intro monologue. And I think there's lots of artists famous for doing that. Isaac Hayes, Millie Jackson, Shirley Brown, Woman to Woman, Marlena Shaw, Go Away Little Boy. These great spoken introductions which give a nice little slant to the song, and they can usually be quite funny. So I love whenever I hear a monologue, my ears always prick up. I always love to see that. There's a CD reissue of one of the Manhattans albums, and as a bonus track, they've got versions of a lot of their famous songs with monologues, but with X-rated monologues. I can't remember which the song is, but there's one that's really funny and very, very rude. Great, check it out, the Manhattans. Next, your favourite soulful reggae singer. Well, here's a great soulful reggae singer, Prince Lincoln of the Royal Rasses. This is a great album. The cover art might not look great, but the album's great. And he has a very soulful style of singing. So that's a really nice one. I just thought I'd mention as well a soul group from Jamaica. So they do a bit of reggae music, but mainly they do soul music. This is the Blues Busters, and their album called Philip and Lloyd. Yeah, like I said, there's a couple of reggae tracks on here, but mostly it's soul numbers. Most noticeably, the opening track, Baby I'm Sorry. Funky soul, just the way I like it. All the way from Jamaica. Great. Next, a live album, and I think Scott mentioned in his video the great live album by Donny Hathaway, and he showed that, but he also mentioned this one, which is also by Donny Hathaway, In Performance. And this gets overshadowed perhaps by the other album, but this is really great. It's up there as well. A beautiful version of A Song for You, amongst many other highlights on this. There's lots of great live albums by soul artists. Bill Withers did a nice one. Curtis did another good one, I'm thinking. So I could have named, there were lots to pick from, but I'm going with Donny because I really like that one. Next is a compilation. We're nearly there now. A compilation, and I've got lots of soul compilations, but I thought I'd go with this one, Shaolin Soul. So in the 1990s, there were a lot of these kind of compilations based on the original samples for hip hop tracks, and a lot of them have got some pretty good music on them. This is an interesting one though, because Shaolin Soul, as you can guess, it's all music sampled by Wu-Tang. Although it doesn't mention Wu-Tang anywhere on the cover. And the reason I'm putting this one is because Wu-Tang had a habit of sampling really great soul artists. So just looking at the list here, we've got Ann Peebles, great artist, O.V. Wright, fantastic, David Porter, Al Green, Marvin Gaye, Donny Hathaway, Syl Johnson, Wendy Renee, who I was showing earlier on, Lynn Collins, the Dramatics, really great soul artists here. So it's not the sort of more typical funk and jazz artists who quite often get sampled. It's real proper soul music that makes the hairs on the back of your neck stand up. So really nice compilation, that one. And I think that's it. There was one final question, which was to talk about your favourite vinyl community channels that talk about soul music. And obviously there's some well-known ones. Nadine at Soul and Disco does some great stuff, and I'm very lucky that she's asked me to be on some of her live streams. John the 6-inch pianist, the legend himself, and Craig, the vinyl record player. He has his own enthusiastic take on life, but I think I've got to recommend Scott himself, DJ Vinyl Vertigo, because I think he does some really interesting stuff and he has some interesting perspectives. I mean, a lot of us are just music nerds pontificating about music, and perhaps we don't really know, but he's somebody who makes music himself, performs, and he's been around and had some interesting experiences in the world of music as well, and I think he's got some interesting takes to give about that when he was growing up, being a punk and things like that. So I think he's got an interesting take, and he shows some interesting stuff. So always definitely a channel worth checking out. Anyway, I think I've rambled on for too long. Those are the 20 questions. That was quite fun to do. Until next time, all the best.